Hello everyone, my name is John Lustry. I'm the Director of Education at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. We're thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Carol Reardon of the Gettysburg Foundation. Thanks for being out here with us today.
Absolutely.
And we are in the National Cemetery here at Gettysburg National Military Park, and of course the Soldiers National Monument behind us, dedicated to all United States soldiers. And today Dr. Reardon's going to be spotlighting several soldiers who were wounded and who ultimately died here at the Battle of Gettysburg. And I wondered if maybe, before we jump into our first story, if maybe you'd tell us a little bit about how the National Cemetery is organized for folks if they want to come here and visit themselves and pay their respects to some of the soldiers we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely. Your trip to Gettysburg is not complete unless you make a stop here.
Absolutely.
It's awfully important for you to do that so that we can remember not just their sacrifice, but even a more important lesson that for any cause that's worth fighting for, even the best plan in the world is going to exact a price in blood. And an awful lot of those cases, the soldiers who put their lives on the line rest here. And we owe it to them to come and remember them. What we want to do today is to focus on a specific subset of Union soldiers who rest here today. The Gettysburg Foundation a number of years ago was able to purchase and rehabilitate the George Spangler Farm. It's right off National Park property. It is a farm that became, on July 1st, 1863, the hospital for the Union Army's 11th Corps. Over the course of 5 weeks, over 1,900 soldiers would be taken care of there. And a number of them just didn't make it. They passed away from their wounds. And at least for a while, Mr. Spangler had a small cemetery going just south of his house.
Right.
They put it in an apple and peach orchard because they figured nobody was going to be plowing up the ground in between the trees.
Right, that makes sense.
Well, ultimately, there were so many Union and Confederate soldiers buried all over the Gettysburg area, something had to be done about it.
Of course.
And shortly after the battle, a local attorney by the name of David Wills was in contact with Governor Andrew Curtin of Pennsylvania, and Governor Curtin authorized Wills to purchase the land for a cemetery for the Union dead. Now, we already had the town cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery, up on this hill that the townspeople were already calling Cemetery Hill. And then there was this ground right here. This was farm fields where we're standing right now. It was property to 5 different Gettysburg residents. If you lived in town and you didn't have much room to plant a garden or to get wood for your fireplace, oftentimes what the local residents would do is just to buy a little property, a little piece of property off the town, and they called them an outlot. And basically the fields up here were outlots for families in town.
So sort of like a small auxiliary kind of field kind of thing.
It's where you could put in some crops, it's where you could get some wood. If you needed rocks for a rock wall, probably you have it right out here. So ultimately what David Wills will do is buy 17 acres up here on the top of this hill, but he had to buy those 17 acres from 5 different property owners to make it work. And ultimately they hired a cemetery designer to come in and lay out what you see today. The Union graves are laid out in concentric circles that all focus on our Soldiers National Monument back here. Many of them have names on the heads, on the stones. Some just have the name unknown. Every one of them, though, has a story. And what we want to do is to tell you the stories of some of the soldiers who were first treated for their injuries down at the George Spangler Farm. And when they passed away, they were buried down there initially. After this property was purchased, there was an effort to try to bring the Union remains from all across the battlefield up here. And we want to follow some of those soldiers from their initial resting place at the George Spangler Farm to their final resting place here and tell you some of their stories.
Absolutely. 2 kind of clarifying notes. Number 1, the soldiers here are organized, aside from those that are totally unknown, they're organized by state, is that right?
The soldiers are organized by states. New York and Pennsylvania have the largest number of dead, but we're standing here, for instance, in the plot for the state of Vermont. And some of the plots are very small. Like Illinois only has about 9 graves in it. So it goes from several hundreds down to just a handful. But it seems perhaps a little ironic that the northern states that always talked about the importance of union insisted here that their dead be buried by states.
Right, right.
Well, one of the reasons for that was simply the initial intention was that the states would contribute to the upkeep of the cemetery.
Sure.
And so every state basically got a little economically minded here and decided that, well, we'll pay in proportion to the number of our soldiers who rest here.
Sure.
And thus the state emphasis became important here.
Right. And then the other question I want to just touch on briefly before we dive into our first story here is, you mentioned all the soldiers that we're going to be highlighting today were initially buried at the Spangler farm. About how long was it between their initial burial and then when they came here to the National Cemetery? I mean, I'm sure it varies depending.
It varies. An awful lot of the burials are not going to take place until after Mr. Lincoln has been here to dedicate the cemetery in November, on November 19th, 1863. A lot of the burials reburials here will take place over the course of about a year after Gettysburg.
I see. Got it. So why don't we get started talking about William March, I believe, of the 13th Vermont. So let's talk about his story.
Well, Private William March has a story that is not atypical of many other young men who made an important decision. He was born in Canada.
Oh.
He was not born in the United States, and his family moved here in some point in the mid-1850s. His mother and father kind of struggled to make a go of things, and his father actually died 10 years before the war, back in about 1852. William March is the oldest of three boys, and he's probably very concerned about taking care of the family back at home. Perhaps because of his young age, he could not enlist in the first explosion of patriotism back in 1861.
Sure.
But in 1862, when the call went out for 300,000 more men, March was now 18, and he wanted to serve. But I suspect his mother wasn't really keen on the idea of him leaving for the long term with two growing teenagers to support.
Of course.
So March decided to join the 13th Vermont Infantry. The 13th Vermont was a 9-month regiment. If he went in October, he could expect to come home in July. He would have discharged his service. He would have gotten some money in the process.
Right.
And it all seemed to make sense. And at first it seemed like a really good decision because the 13th Vermont was stationed in the defenses of Washington. And from October through the very end of June, he never heard a gunshot fired in anger, and he could look forward in just a few weeks to going home. But then as Robert E. Lee's army marched into Pennsylvania and General Meade wanted as much support for his Army of the Potomac that he could get, the Vermont Brigade stationed in the defenses of Washington was ordered to march into Pennsylvania and join the Army of the Potomac. Looks like Private March is going to see some battle after all.
Right.
Well, in fact, that's what happened. The 13th Vermont is going to see action on both the second and the third day of the battle. He survives the first day of battle. On the second day, he comes through unscathed. But on the 3rd of July, it's William March's 13th Vermont, along with the 14th and 16th Vermont, that participate in flanking the right flank of Pickett's charge. And in that action, he would not be quite so fortunate.
Right.
Private March was hit in the legs by a Confederate cannonball.
In both legs.
He got hit in both legs. Both legs were horribly mangled.
Sure. And
there was at least one report that tourniquets were put around each leg. I doubt that he was able to do it, but somebody was watching out for him. And they were watching out for him in another way. They wanted to get him off the field as soon as they possibly could. The nearest field hospital where you would have surgeons capable of taking care of this grievous wound was the George Spangler Farm.
Right.
Even though the Spangler Farm was the 11th Corps hospital and March belongs to the 1st Corps, they weren't going to quibble about something like that.
Exactly.
And they took Private March down there. Private March apparently struggled and fought very hard to survive, but the wounds were too grievous and he died later that day.
Oh, the same day.
Pretty much the same day. He was initially buried out in the orchard behind the Spangler Farm, and that's where he would rest until his remains would be brought up here. Now back home is his mother. His mother is only 39 years old. She has a long life ahead of her and 2 young boys that she's going to have to feed. What was possible for a widow or a bereaved mother like this was to apply for some funds from the federal government. Back in July of 1862, the Lincoln administration had signed legislation that created something that was known collectively as the widow's pension. And if you happen to be, if you happen to fit some of the qualifications that they put in place, you could apply for, since March was a private, you could apply for a monthly pension of about half of his pay. In this case, it was $8 a month. It wasn't a lot, but it was at least something on which you could build.
Exactly.
And so she applied for a dependent mother's pension. One of the things she had to do is to focus not on the noun mother, but the adjective dependent.
Right.
And what she had to prove was not only that he was legally enlisted and killed in battle, but that he had contributed financially to her support and the support of the family. And as long as she could do that, the government would grant the pension. The pension was granted, and Private William March served his country and fell in action, but his service also triggered all the requirements necessary for her to take care of her family in the future.
And that's one of the reasons why I find the story of Civil War medicine so compelling, because it really underscores how Civil War battles like Gettysburg are so much more than, 3 days of battle. They extend so much further beyond, and that's a great example of that.
Well, it's like throwing a pebble into a pond. The ripples just happen to radiate out for a long time and for many, many years. Some of the soldiers that rest here will be able to, through their sacrifice, provide pensions for their survivors that are going to be paid for clear into the 20th century.
Absolutely.
And Lord knows how many families were kept together by the few dollars that their sacrifice would provide for them.
Definitely. Well, a really moving story to start us off, and we're going to go ahead and I think head on to our next spot.
Okay.